welcome to Stand Up for Doctors. I'm your host, Kim Downey. Thank you very much for joining us. I'd like to welcome Dr. Sheetal Ajmani and Amita Nathwani. Thanks for joining us today, Sheetal and Amita.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. And by way of a brief introduction, Sheetal is a pediatrician by training, and she now helps high-achieving women live radiantly again through major life transitions. She's also a speaker, podcast host, author, and thought leader. Amita is part of the fellowship faculty at the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine. She's been a practitioner and educator in the field of Ayurvedic medicine for over 20 years. Her work is centered around applying traditional Ayurvedic knowledge to address modern health challenges. And today we're going to be talking about how each of you came to practice Ayurvedic medicine. Sheetal is a physician and Amita is a non-physician, and how you're each pursuing bridging the gap between traditional and contemporary medical systems. So as we get started, I always ask what you'd most like our audience to know about you, and feel free to include hobbies, really whatever you want. Sheetal, would you like to go first?
Sure. So goodness, what I would like folks to most know about me, I guess, to recap a bit of what you shared, Kim. So I practiced as a pediatrician for over 16 years. But even from my first year of medical school, these seeds were planted for yoga and Ayurveda. And so I, from the very beginning of my medical training, have had an interest, a professional interest in really holistic healthcare, holistic ways of well-being. And it was really through my own journey of diving deeper into these modalities over the past 20 plus years that have really led me to what I'm doing now, which we'll get into a little bit more in detail here, of really bringing together Eastern and Western approaches, currently now in the capacity of a coach, speaker, and podcast host.
Well, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. And Amita, what would you like us to know about you?
So very similar to Sheetal, but really on the opposite side. I had the opportunity to study Ayurveda from when I was younger, but I actually come from a family of Western physicians. So integrated into my Ayurvedic training was always Western medicine. So sort of the opposite of Sheetal's training. And what's really interesting about that is being able to have that open-minded perspective on how it is that we're not trying to be right, we're trying to help the patient. And as soon as we get to that place where we think this way or that way, we've missed the point entirely. So having a viewpoint of two perspectives and being able to bring them together is really important to me. And one of the joys and challenges that I've experienced over the last couple of decades practicing Ayurvedic medicine. And I'm just always so honored to be able to talk about it, because when I first began studying about 25 years ago, this is practically unheard of. We weren't talking about integrating Ayurvedic medicine into Western curriculum or into hospitals, or even talking about ashwagandha or any of those aspects. And, I think one of the things that really led me here to be able to stand on a platform like this and discuss it on a day-to-day basis with my patients or practical application has been also my own personal life experience. So about 12 years ago, I lost my husband, and I was practicing Ayurveda before then, but I was practicing the do's and the don'ts, all the things that we know about Ayurveda, like do yoga and wake up at a certain time and eat this, don't eat that. But when we really start to look at its application, it was at that point that I realized it's not about that at all. It's about the individual person, what they're experiencing. And I actually abandoned my Ayurvedic routine at that time in order to find my path, my own individual path. And that's what truly Ayurveda is. And that's what I like to convey. It's not a set parameters of things that one should do for themselves, but it's something that you have to really ask yourself, how do I want to live life in accordance with myself. And then when we step into the world of physiological health, we have to understand it in terms of homeostasis. So who are we? What do we need for ourselves? And how do we achieve that? And I think Ayurveda is such a great adjunct to help us get there.
Well, that's so beautifully said, and I'm so sorry that you had to go through that. But as you're saying, you use that kind of as an impetus to change your practice for yourself and for your patients as well. And there's nothing like going through an experience, right, to know it deep in the gut. And I can understand that. Sheetal, what does that bring mind to you?
Yeah, goodness, there's so much I want to reflect on that. First of all, I agree wholeheartedly, Amita, and Amita and I had an opportunity to chat a few weeks ago as well, and to get to know a little bit more about each other and the work that we're doing. But just this idea of, and I think we are both in agreement of that, just this idea that it's not one or the other. So often people will think that something has to be like all or nothing. You're either 100% taking the Western allopathic approach or 100% taking an Eastern holistic approach. And, certainly years ago, and thankfully this is changing, but years ago when I first began my training in yoga and Ayurveda, having completed my training as an allopathic physician. So I started practices personally while I was a first year medical student. And then the seed was planted, and I knew I wanted to dive deeper into those once I completed my formal medical training. And some time and space opened up for me to do so. And so when I did that, it was so interesting. There was such a dichotomy because this was back in 2009, 2010, so quite a while ago. And there was such a dichotomy that I felt, certainly as a physician in the yoga training circles, there was such a distrust for medical doctors. And then at that time, and within my medical colleague community, there was such a distrust of, holistic, Ayurvedic, more sort of natural, you would say, methodologies. And so I'm so glad to see that that is changing, because even from my first year of medical school, that first semester, when I first personally got introduced to yoga and Ayurveda, I remember writing on a little scrap sheet of paper, East meets West medicine. I just always knew from the very beginning of my training that there is a place for both of these, and that the beauty is when they come together. And so I think, understanding what Western allopathic has to offer us so many incredible benefits and the place that that holds for us, as well as understanding where these Ayurvedic practices, which is so much around, a lot of concepts that we're now seeing in the field of lifestyle medicine, of really your daily routines, stress management, your diet, things like that, your activities on a daily basis, your relationships, your social connection, that all of that really does play a role in your overall health and well-being. And so when we're able to bring all of that together, that's where the magic happens. And then I also wanted to reflect on, because I resonate so deeply also with what Amita shared, that it really does come and is born from our own personal experiences. So, for me, there is the study of these concepts, and then there's the practical applications. And for anyone who is interested in either diving into it in your own personal life, and or if you're a healthcare professional looking for ways to explore integrating these modalities into your practice, I think it really starts with yourself. So for me, I studied these concepts of Ayurveda. I studied yoga, meditation, mindfulness. While I was studying it, I was integrating these concepts into my daily life, and really firsthand seeing how they affect me. And the thing is, it isn't one size fits all. Ayurveda is not about a one size fits all approach. It really is very personalized and individualized, just like Amita shared. When you started integrating it into your own life, when you were going through challenging season in your own life, that's when you said, okay, I'm going to let go of sort of the rigidity to these routines, right? We can tend to have such a rigidity to, this is what I was told I should do. This is exactly what I need to do. But Ayurveda is, and this is something that does differ a bit from the Western approach, is that it is so individualized. It does say that the same routines, the same activities, the same diet is not going to be the same for each person. It really depends on what you are experiencing within your own body, within your own mind, and your own emotions, that we really need to come up with a very tailored approach for you. And so it really was through going through challenging seasons within my own life as well. For me personally, that included things like career burnout, transitions in my career, divorce, just navigating toxic and difficult relationships, that sort of thing, that really has, each of those challenges really helped me dive deeper into my own exploration of these practices. The other thing that I wanted to share real briefly here also is that Ayurveda talks about seasonal self-care and seasonal routines, right? And for me, that has been one of the biggest lessons, because it talks about these seasonal routines and seasonal self-care not only in terms of physical seasons of the year, but seasons of your life, right? And so when you're going through a difficult season of your life, it gives you a framework to nurture and nourish and honor yourself through those challenging seasons. And that's something where now in my coaching work with a lot of clients that I work with, as well as, myself, in the past when I was going through challenging situations, and even now, because it's certainly a practice of finding that self-compassion through the challenging seasons and of honoring and accepting your unique needs, and that might be different from someone else's. And I think that can often be a very difficult thing to navigate. And so having a framework for that, and Ayurveda really provides a beautiful framework for that.
Well, thank you. I love that. And I read, when I was going through my own health challenges, I read a book called Wintering, and it, talks about like seasons of your life. So I could fully resonate with that. And I know we dived right into Ayurveda. Amita, if someone wanted to hear from you an elevator speech about what Ayurvedic medicine is, what would you respond?
Yeah, so I come from it from a classical Ayurveda perspective, and Ayurveda is an approach to your physiological, mental, and emotional health that takes into consideration your genetic predisposition, your likes, your dislikes, where you are at this point in your life. And more specifically, each one of us has an individual constitution. And how we look at all of that together and apply lifestyle medicine, botanicals, and diet in order to help regain homeostasis within the body. And that is Ayurveda. And then there's Ayurvedic medicine, which is something that's actually practiced, that is not necessarily something that each one of us does on a day-to-day basis. The day-to-day basis of understanding Ayurveda is prevention and maintenance of health. But then there's also treatment of disease. And that's where an individual provider can come in and really look at things from a pathological perspective. And even Ayurveda has its own pathology. Ayurveda has its own departments of medicine, ranging everything from internal medicine, ENT, and even surgery. The grandfather of plastic surgery was actually an Ayurvedic doctor. And so what we do is we take these components of balancing the body through self-Ayurvedic techniques, and then also apply Ayurvedic medicine in case we have gotten out of balance or we're no longer in homeostasis. And that's what Ayurvedic medicine does.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing that. And I'm wondering if you can each share maybe like a powerful example from yourself or a client, changes that you've witnessed through practicing of Ayurveda. Sheetal, would you like to go first?
Sure. So for me, as I mentioned, it really has been a powerful tool for understanding myself better, and also a powerful tool to share with my clients to help them understand themselves better. And really, I see it as, I agree wholeheartedly with everything that Amita shared about definitions of Ayurveda. And I think I'm so grateful, Kim, that you invited both of us to come on, because I think both of us being on also shows just the variety in terms of what you can do with this knowledge of Ayurveda, and also how different practitioners use it. So for me, I would say that I'm not practicing specifically Ayurvedic medicine, specifically as Amita has defined it, but rather I'm using Ayurveda as a framework and tool for understanding ourselves better, for connecting women I work with men and women, but specifically I do focus on working with women, but connecting people, connecting individuals to their inner nature, to understanding themselves better, to honoring themselves, to finding ways to find greater self-compassion, specifically through those challenging seasons of their life. And so that is exactly what Ayurveda has provided for me as well. You know, it really addresses Ayurveda technically the technical translation of Ayurveda is the study of life or the science of life, right? And so it really encompasses all aspects of your life, relationships, emotions, your spiritual life, as well as your physical and physiological processes as well. But it really sees that all of those are related, right? So through Ayurveda, it's sort of this relationship between how these physical practices also affect your emotional world. So for me, you know, going through challenging seasons of life, I can feel very ungrounded. I can feel very critical of myself, right? Those relate to these constitutions called Vata and Pitta. So for me, finding activities that counter that, whether that's in my diet or physical activities, or also how I talk to myself, can help to counter that and achieve that sort of, as Amita used the word, homeostasis in my life and during those seasons. So it's been that cultivating this self-awareness, and then Ayurveda provides this framework for, okay, now that you have this self-awareness of how you're feeling, okay, say I'm feeling ungrounded, uncentered, I'm feeling very critical of myself, very sort of fiery and critical of myself, right? Then Ayurveda also provides a framework of so many tools that you can choose from, choose what's going to be the best for you to help counter that, to find that homeostasis. So it's through those challenging seasons of my life that I've been able to lean into Ayurveda and find those tools to help me feel more grounded, more centered, more compassionate towards myself. And that's the similar sort of result that many of my clients have found as well. Now, the specific tools, the specific qualities that have come up for them may be different, right? And so that approach is completely tailored to them, but a similar sort of effect and results.
Well, and I like the focus on healthcare versus sick care, right? And that we can all benefit if there was more of an emphasis on, primary care and the things that you're talking about as well. And I just published an episode last week with a local pulmonologist, Dr. Jose Mendez, and when he even talks about sleep, and he says so much of it is self-inflicted, and a lot of it is just through taking a history, and some very simple changes can have a big impact. So I see that, is related to what we're talking about. Amita, would you like to share a specific example in case some of this seems a little too general for some people that aren't familiar with it, how it's directly impacted you or your clients?
So yes, I'll actually just give a really concrete example. Sheetal really beautifully encompassed the value of lifestyle medicine and how that can in turn help the body. But I also love to talk about it in terms of, symptomology. So one of my specialties is digestive disorders and psychiatry and how they affect one another. And so I oftentimes like to give the example of acid reflux. So when we talk about GERD or acid reflux, in Ayurveda, we don't just see it for the symptom that it is, which is a burning sensation in the esophageal area. We would classify that as, excess heat, excess hydrochloric acid that has an upflux. But the question really begs is, what is the root cause? And this is where some of the concepts of Ayurvedic medicine can come into play that Sheetal was mentioning. So do we have an obstruction? Is this what's causing the acid reflux to occur? Do we have excess production of hydrochloric acid? Do we perhaps have a vitiation or like a hiatal hernia? Could this be because there is sluggishness in the digestion and therefore the body's not producing enough bile? There's not enough bile production in order to break down the food that you have. And we look at these things in terms of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. Is the pathway off? Are the enzymes or the digestive acids, are they out of balance? Do we have an obstruction, whether it's in the epigastric region or lower, where the body is producing enough bile to break down the food that we have. So when we look at it in terms of that, we can actually apply Ayurvedic remedies to combat it. So when I talk about acid reflux, I oftentimes say, you know how half the population says sodium bicarbonate for hydrochloric acid, and half the population says apple cider vinegar for acid reflux. And they're both two completely different therapies, literally on the pH scale, but why do both of them have a similar effect? And it comes down to, what is the root cause? Do we need sodium bicarbonate, or do we need apple cider vinegar? Are we needing to aid the digestion, or do we need to simmer it down? And when we look at that in terms of Ayurveda and the qualities of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, we can then apply the appropriate botanicals, foods, and remedies, and then even understanding the qualities from pharmacology and Western medicine, how we're able to apply that. And these are ways in which very specifically and concretely we work with individual disorders and Ayurvedic medicine.
Well, thank you. That's an excellent concrete example. And Sheetal, I don't know if you have a concrete example that you'd like to share as well.
I think that was a great example. As opposed to perhaps a concrete example, there was something that came to mind that I just want to make sure that I share here. While we have time on the episode today, and that is this definition of health. So kind of reflecting on something that you shared earlier, Kim, about this, shifting from this idea of sick care versus healthcare. And I just wanted to bring that up because I think it's a really important and valuable point for your audience and listeners here. The World Health Organization defines health not as simply the absence of disease, but actually encompassing and addressing all aspects of health and well-being, physical, social, mental, and emotional. So that is from the World Health Organization definition of health. Ayurveda has a similar definition of health. Ayurveda looks as health as being not just the absence of disease or a particular diagnosis, but actually of living fully, living radiantly, living vibrantly. And so there's so often things that can be sort of symptoms that may seem kind of vague that can come up for a lot of individuals that when they see a Western practitioner, go through a complete lab workup, and everything comes back normal. And in the Western allopathic world, when that happens, it's like, okay, you're, according to everything that we have here, according to all the diagnostic tests that we have available, everything looks fine, right? Yet still many people are experiencing vague symptoms. And that's where, it's still, according to the World Health Organization definition of health, according to the Ayurvedic definition of health, there's still something out of alignment, still something that is not quite in a homeostatic balance, right? In homeostasis. And so I just wanted to bring that up because, we can talk about this, and kind of going back to sort of the beginning of talking about how, often people may think that these are two completely separate things, but no, actually, from the World Health Organization defines health in this way, Ayurveda defines health in this way. It's just finding the appropriate means and path to achieve that state.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's thriving versus surviving, right? I've heard that as well. So thank you. Now, so Amita, if there's people who are thinking, okay, I don't really know anything about this, it sounds kind of interesting, what would be like one next step for someone to learn a little bit more about it?
So thank goodness there's a lot of great information out there now, and it's quite popular. You can go online and learn about it. There are these Ayurvedic quizzes that people take to figure out what their constitution is and body type. I don't love them too much because it does pigeonhole us and it puts us into a box without considering that there are qualities that are always changing in the body. But for the purposes of education and understanding why these questions come up, how we're looking at the person, mind, body, and spirit, I would recommend that anyone go online and find a quiz that they like, get to know about Ayurveda, get to know about yourself. I have a quiz on my website if anybody ever wants to look at that, Amita Ayurveda. And I also, I've written a book called Ayurveda, Breaking the Rules Without Breaking the Principles. And it's just an introduction to Ayurvedic medicine from a perspective that, is digestible and we can understand it. It's not Ayurvedic medicine and pathology, but it is just sort of an open door to not only the physical part of the body, but the psycho-spiritual aspects of who we are as well. So I would encourage anyone to just, open your mind and explore this possibility, because there are so many things that we do today in our life that we don't even know are deeply rooted in Ayurvedic principles, like breathing exercises, or even tapping, yoga, stretching, even concepts of drinking warm lemon water or ginger tea for nausea. So many of these spices that we use on a day-to-day basis, like turmeric and cumin, what are their medicinal benefits? And it's all rooted there in these ancient ways of understanding ourselves. And then I encourage everyone to translate it and take it to time and place of where you are today. Who are you? What is your genetic predisposition? Did you grow up eating meat and potatoes? Did you grow up in Southeast Asia? Did you grow up in the United States? What is available in your environment? And translate all of that into time and place and who you are today.
Well, thank you for sharing all of that, and I'll put the links in the show notes to your website and your book. And Tito, do you have any final words you want to add? Any top tips for your colleagues? Any links you want to share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for asking, Kim. So additional resources to getting started. I do have a online self-paced program course that anyone can access on my website at radiantlivinginstitute.com. It's called Radiant Self-Care Through Ayurveda is the name of the course. It's 4-video course that you can go through on your own. I am really big on making sure that every single offering that I have gives you very practical tools that you can implement right away. So you will learn a lot through the course, as well as you will definitely come away from it with really practical tools that you can start to implement right away. So definitely take a peek at that. And then, for anyone listening, whether you're in healthcare or not. And for my healthcare colleagues, it really does start with us. It really does start with us familiarizing ourselves with that. So this course is great for you as well to get started, because before we can recommend it to our patients, we really have to gain a deep understanding of it ourselves. And then you can always, of course, schedule a consultation with me, and you can just find the links to that directly on my website as well at radiantlivinginstitute.com.
Okay, well, thank you. This has been a great, informative conversation. I think everyone will know more about Ayurvedic practices and Ayurvedic medicine after this. So thanks again for being my guest. I loved having you both.
Thank you so much for having us.
You're welcome. So in closing, to move the needle in healthcare, we all need to raise our voices, and we all need to care about each other. We already know that doctors need to care about patients. Patients need to care about doctors too. So stand up, doctors, and let's stand up for doctors.